An abrupt end to the music. Not a fade. We try to do nice fades at WWNO. Good afternoon. I'm Eve Troeh. I'm the news director at WWNO, our local NPR affiliate here in New Orleans. It's great to see such a wonderful turnout for this afternoon's programming. After lunch, sometimes in New Orleans, our attention can wane, so very encouraging to see you all here. We'll stick with a note that Judith started on resilient cities. This panel is called What Kind of Cities Do We Want to Build? I think it's interesting that it's not what kind of cities do we want to rebuild? And I'm joined by two guests who are in some ways on opposite sides of the same coin on that, and in some ways exactly aligned on that theme. I've got Luisa Dantas with me. She's a filmmaker. She works, you might know her work primarily through the Land of Opportunity project. And I have Keegan of GCR, who is the Director of Community Resilience for that group. And we'll start by showing a clip which is from the Katrina Sandy interactive timeline that Luisa has put together. An extension of the Land of Opportunity documentary was to look at post-Sandy responses and to see how community concerns were really similar from New Orleans in post-Katrina New Orleans through post-Sandy in New York and New Jersey. So if we can, let's take a look at that.
I was scared to death. I had to go on the 7th floor, and all the cars was covered with water.
At least hundreds more people still trapped on roofs.
That was great, yes, that was great, but there was also survival. I thought this is what chaos looks like.
We used to come for the summers in '66, moved down here in '73. I never saw anything like this in all these years.
Why are they doing nothing and we're having to stay in these trailers? We're talking about let us go ahead and build a house.
We're not asking for any handouts, but I know there was money put aside for this. We just want what we need to get back to where we were.
Great, thanks. And you can see more videos at the website landofopportunityinteractive.com. You can click around and explore some of the similarities and the narratives that were collected after Sandy and after Katrina. One of the interesting things about that clip right there is that you see a mix-up of New Orleans and the East Coast communities. You can't always tell who's saying what about where. You can interchange some of those voiceovers with some of those images that you're seeing. And Luisa, that's an intentional thing that you've done with the filmmaking there. Tell us more about that approach.
So I think one of the reasons that we started, the Land of Opportunity project was deeply steeped in post-Katrina rebuilding for the first 5 years. And it was a documentary that then became an interactive platform that looks at post-crisis community rebuilding in 5 cities across the US. And as soon as Sandy happened, I started collaborating with a participatory documentary project called Sandy Storyline in New York, because we sort of immediately recognized that there was a real value to sort of comparing and contrasting these stories and sort of gleaning the lessons learned, because there is sort of an allergy to connecting the dots in this country to a certain extent, and that led to a real kind of New Orleans exceptionalism. This happened over there to those crazy people who live below sea level, and it could never happen to us. And then when it happens in the heart of global capitalism, essentially, it becomes a different conversation. So, a lot of the work we've been doing is really looking at how do we not keep reinventing the wheel and kind of acting like these are sort of sui generis events that happen. And how are communities being impacted, who's being left out of these conversations, of these rebuilding processes, and who's rebuilding how and at what pace, which I think is something new.
So I think similarly, I know you said we're on 2 different sides of things, but I think we're similarly looking, I work for a firm here in New Orleans, GCR. I also used to work at the state of Louisiana post-Katrina, and I think one of the things that my firm's been able to do is really take the recovery lessons here that we've all learned and really bring them to other communities. And so one of the things that we were able to do is work with the state of New Jersey, the city of New York, and the state of New York to really transfer lessons learned and help them to learn the intricacies and the challenges of working with federal recovery dollars, working quickly, but making good decisions. And so I think that what we have seen is that there are a lot of similarities in these recoveries, one of which is that our toolkit still has some gaps. I think after Katrina, we didn't really have a roadmap, and we built from there. We also had the unfortunate events of Gustav and Ike, as well as the oil spill, to really refine our tools, and we were able to take those forward to New York and help them to hopefully begin to step through this a little bit more quickly than we were. However, it's really a challenging and deeply involved process, as everyone in this room knows, and it takes everyone, and it's quite a challenge to do this faster and better and smarter.
For both of you, I'd like you to talk about how the communities themselves in these different places see themselves as united by their risk and by their experience of disasters that have happened, or their risk for future disasters happening. Do people along the Gulf Coast see themselves as connected to people who were afflicted by Sandy? And how does that manifest itself in the communications, either formal or informal, that have happened between those two places? Luisa?
Well, I think New Orleans has become, as has been said many times today, a model in many ways, and a place of deep knowledge and experience. New Orleanians have been at sort of the leading edge of disaster recovery and sort of preparing and living with disaster in a way that other communities in this country haven't. And so the sort of immediate thing that started to happen, I think, even in the media and then certainly on the actual like policy and technical advisory side, was looking to New Orleanians to give knowledge and wisdom. And New Orleanians were incredibly generous with that because they were seeing that there was a situation that was happening that people would benefit from their knowledge. So there has been, certainly through our project, a lot of conversation, especially with community members, who have felt sort of shut out of recovery, and talking about strategies to deal with that, and certainly around community organizing, which has been really great to see some of that dialogue that's happening.
I think one of the things that we were able to do was to be able to bring the government leaders who had just stepped into their new recovery lives in New York and in New Jersey, and really bring them and connect them to people here throughout the community, in government as well, just to be able to know that they had somebody they could talk to when they were having a challenge, and they could have a thought partner here in Louisiana. One other just quick story is that when we got to New York right after Sandy, we were met with a group of other companies that had also gone up to really be able to share that experience and to really be able to share, help people to get on the ground and get moving quickly.
It's low-hanging fruit to be critical of the disaster response industry and to highlight the irony that there is profit to be made in disaster. At the same time, these are hugely important contracts and hugely important projects that need to be accomplished, both to respond and to recover and rebuild. How do you get your head around the understanding of that this is an industry that is going to be developing and even growing as we face further challenges of climate change, more erratic weather around the country and around the world? How do we understand that this is both a huge opportunity, as the name of your project suggests, and a huge responsibility, a hugely accountable industry to the people that it's meant to serve, some of the most vulnerable people going through some of the most difficult times in their lives? Robin?
So I think that one thing, as I mentioned earlier, the reality is that we are still working on this toolkit and really trying to fill in gaps. And I think that having a group of people who've done this in the past, who can walk in the door prepared, but every situation's different. And so having to be really open and honest and learn from the communities that you're in. It's not going to look exactly like it looked here, although a lot of it is similar. We had a lot of our clients tell us often, okay, but we're not New Orleans, we are our own place, and we want to be our own place, and we have the responsibility, even though it is a private structure, we have the responsibility to help those communities with the skills and the toolkits that we have.
Just to continue, what tools are in that toolkit? What do you mean when you use that term?
Sure. So I think that in terms of moving, response and recovery needs to happen very, very quickly. But in communities that have fallen on their knees and that are just looking at themselves, there is a real need for planning, as was just talked about earlier, and as many of the people in this room have participated in, really being able to plan and recover at the same time, really being able to look forward, but also be able to give people the resources that they need to rebuild immediately, the resources that they need to think about their immediate future, and make plans for their communities and for their families and their immediate lives.
And Luisa, back to the question on the opportunity side of things.
I think, I look at things from the storytelling side of things. I think something that I'm feeling, and it's been, again, addressed many times today, I'm feeling sort of very much that kind of crushing weight of the need to create kind of a unified narrative of recovery that is either purely positive or purely negative, and that really emphasizes that the sort of this unified pace of recovery, when the reality, as has been pointed out very starkly today, people recover very differently, and that is a different time frame for different people. And this notion of opportunity is woven into that, I think. It's the idea that disruption and transformation create opportunity for change. And the question is, whose opportunity, who's seizing that, who's driving that forward? So a lot of the storytelling that I've been doing has really been looking at how people are relating to that notion of opportunity, and in many cases in communities that continue to for whom Katrina is a ongoing reality and an ongoing disaster, the opportunity for organizing and community resistance and coming together and challenging the dominant narrative and challenging the way that things are being done has been really important. And, in many ways, I think people would say that the organizing landscape that existed in New Orleans pre-Katrina was extremely robust and was decimated by Katrina and is struggling to get back to pre-Katrina levels. At the same time, there's been an extraordinary amount of citizen engagement and grassroots organizing. And in New York, looking at what Occupy Sandy has been doing, and a lot of the groups that are working together to sort of keep the story of post-Sandy rebuilding even on the radar, because in Sandy, it's a different story in that it's sort of fallen off that unified narrative radar, and...
What has Occupy Sandy been doing? Right. I have no idea.
I mean, they're working with a lot of the groups that are continuing, a lot of the folks who are still trying to get back on their feet, and, especially with public housing residents who, in Red Hook, for example, who are trying to... And also trying to build a resilience plan, thinking about it from a grassroots level, thinking about resilience from a grassroots organizing level. So, yeah, I think that's been...
I would like to ask the crowd, how many people here are New Yorkers or New Jersey residents or former New Yorkers, New Jersey residents? Do we have, surprising number. I feel that some of the story of New Orleans, even before Sandy, has been more interplay between that community and New Orleans. You've got more people moving back and forth, settling, resettling, returning to New Orleans if they're from here and maybe spent some time up there. So that's sort of a natural relationship that's occurred separate from these two disasters, but in some ways growing because of it.
Well, I think an interesting point on that is that I think I was at New York at the time of 9/11 and then also at the time of Katrina, though I'm a New Orleanian and returned after Katrina. But we actually have a large number, I saw a lot of the hands in here, and a large number of the people that are actually here from New York actually did help in the 9/11 recovery and came to New Orleans and the state to bring us those resources and those knowledge. So in effect, I think kind of the work that I'm doing and the work that my colleagues are doing is really then bringing that back to Sandy. It's a different type of disaster and a different lesson that needs to be learned, but it's an interesting exchange. I think you're right, it's been going on for a long time.
Speaking of exchange, we just have a few minutes left, but we will take some audience questions. We have some of those ready.
Hi, my name is Ira Nabatoff, and I've just got a couple of questions. What lessons learned did you guys have from here that you were able to take up to New York and New Jersey in terms of cultural sensitivity and how recovery affected non-homeowner families? Because that seemed to be a great piece of the equation badly lost here.
I think that one of the things that is continually important in these are really having the opportunity to speak with the communities, be part of the communities, and have them engage in the planning. And so one of the things that New York State did is that they started a community reconstruction program, and that was able to work in communities throughout the state that have been impacted and allowed multiple voices to come and multiple people to come and be part of their community's rebuilding. And that was something that was taken, I think, in large part from the planning efforts across the state of Louisiana, from the multiple planning processes that were here in New Orleans. And I think that is one of the most important things, is to keep that dialogue open and keeping keeping all people as part of the conversation, so that the opportunity developed is really for everyone.
We have another question.
Hi, Keith Lederman from Kingsley House here in New Orleans. And not necessarily related to Sandy, but a little bit before that with the Cedar Rapids, Iowa flooding. And I distinctly remember, and I think a lot of people here recall the same thing, that after Cedar Rapids in 2008, there were a lot of boisterous claims coming out of Iowa that we are picking ourselves up by our own bootstraps, not waiting for federal help, and we can do this recovery thing ourselves. And my hunch, though, is that there was a lot of federal help that went into Cedar Rapids, probably per capita as much federal help that went to help the folks throughout Iowa and the many counties that flooded. And I just wanted to see if you all had some insights into the myth versus the reality. Because, again, when people started calling it Cedar Rapids Katrina or Iowa's Katrina, there just seemed to be a real reluctance of folks in Iowa to want to have anything to do with being put in the same kind of boat as we here in New Orleans. And I'm not sure if much of that happened after Sandy in New Jersey. I think there was less so, but just that kind of perspective thing, if you can share some insights into that, be appreciated. Thanks.
So I think that one of the lessons from recovery is to recognize that there are multiple partners in recovery and there are multiple resources that are needed. And the federal government plays a huge role in immediate response and in recovery response. And they've been working really hard to make sure that they're always tweaking that model so that they're moving forward with the communities that they're helping. It is a huge role, and for communities to say that they are working and pulling themselves up from the bootstraps, they absolutely are, because they are the ones that are making the decisions and they're the ones doing the work. However, the need is greater than really any one resource could manage, and I think that for just recognizing the federal government, the philanthropic community, the civic community, and the private community, as well as the residents within those communities, are all actors and they're all partners and they all have a role.
Luisa, reluctance of communities to identify with Katrina?
Right, and again, I think that gets back to the narrative and the portrayal of New Orleans and New Orleanians immediately post-Katrina as refugees, as victims, as people who stayed and who, in some form or fashion deserved what happened to them. I think that there was a real negative story constructed around what happened here, which really creates this kind of distance. The tagline of our project is happening to a city near you. It's this idea that these things will be happening to us in our backyards, and the more we sort of create a distance and an inability to recognize ourselves in these communities, the more detrimental it is to actually really not continuously repeating this.
And I think one of the key elements for communities, and there are so many great efforts like the Rockefeller resilience efforts, are really to help communities plan now and not wait until this happens, because it is coming, sadly, to communities, or it will come again. And this is the opportunity, and there do need to be federal resources as well as local resources really focused on what is that plan going to be, what kind of city do we want to be, what kind of city are we, and what do we want to be if this shock were to happen to us. I think that's really important.
Robin Keegan with GCR, Director of Community Resilience there. Luisa Dantas, filmmaker with landofopportunityinteractive.com. Thank you so much.
Thank you.